The Planters, Northern Pride, by Caroline Lee Hentz. Caroline Lee Hentz was born in Massachusetts, and she moved to Cincinnati in 1832. But from there, Hentz's life took her south, to Kentucky, North Carolina, Alabama, and Florida. Caroline's immersion in rural southern life during this period also deepened her intellectual and emotional attachment to her adopted region and shaped her fictional style and authorial perspective. As her first extended exposure to Southern plantation society and culture, it was as Southern writer that she became popular with a national audience. By 1854, she had published almost a dozen fiction, most set in the South. She rapidly became one of America's most popular writers. The popularity of Hentz's books can be attributed to her mastery in writing sentimental novels, the successful young woman who is pursued by a variety of dangerous suitors until a handsome man rescues her. In 1824, Caroline married Nicholas Hentz. After marrying, they moved to Florence, Alabama, where they started an all-girls school called Locust Dell Academy. During the early 1830s, Caroline and her husband, along with their 3 children, moved to North Carolina, and a few years later, in 1849, Nicholas became an invalid after nearly 5 years of supporting her family financially. In 1856, she moved to Marianna, Florida, where she dies of pneumonia. The Planter's Northern Pride begins with a preface where Caroline glorifies the slavery system and states how cheerful and content are the slaves of the plantation. The plot revolves around Moreland, a plantation master. As the title suggests, Moreland's bride is from North, and it is her shift from her northern home to southern plantation household that is used to point out the difference between the North and the South. The novel brings the whole idea of southern household: the authoritative master, submissive wife, and obedient slaves. The other protagonist, Eulalia, makes a journey from her home in New England to the South in this journey, and it changes her preconceived notion of the South and its people. This novel, The Planter's Northern Pride, features various subplots tied to Moreland family and his slaves, and was anchored by the threat of a slave revolt, and this threat is thwarted. Eulalia's family, including her staunchly abolitionist father, visit the plantation only when the threat is finally thwarted. After seeing the kind treatment and apparent contentment of Moreland's slaves firsthand, her slavery side, considering that if all masters were as kind and wise as Moreland, then abolitionism could die out. The novel also includes anecdotes of formerly freed slaves who regret their liberty and ask to return to the care of their former masters. The Planter's Northern Pride is a work published by a New Englander transplanted to the South. When the novel was first published in 1854, it became very popular. This novel was considered as a charming love story, but also a conceiving answer and counterattack to Uncle Tom's Cabin. As a popular plantation romance, it reflects the literary taste of the 1850s, as well as the reasoning about slavery. 2 years before the publication of this book, The Planter's Northern Pride, Mrs. Beecher Stowe had fired the first shot of the war that she created with the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Like Stowe, Caroline Lee Hentz was born in Massachusetts, and she moved to Cincinnati in 1832. From there, life took Caroline to the South, what made her become a Southern writer that became popular with a national audience. Therefore, Caroline's own background and experience revealed parallels to Mrs. Stowe's. Harriet resided 18 years in Cincinnati, and she returned to New England and learned most of what she knew about slavery from her reading. Mrs. Hentz followed the Rolling Stone career of her brilliant husband about the Deep South for the rest of her life. In addition to her broad acquaintance with the South, Mrs. Hentz had professional experience that fitted her for the writing of The Planter's Northern Pride, and a professional reputation that assured her at an audience through the rest of the century. The pattern of the plantation romance was already firmly set by the decade in which Uncle Tom's Cabin and The Planter's Northern Bride were published. Mrs. Hentz, like Mrs. Stowe, inherited a cast of stock characters that had begun to charm readers as early as 1832. The most familiar of the stereotypes in this popular tradition are the hospitable, humane, old slaveholder, the gay Southern belle, the gallant young gentleman who wins her love, and the favorably impressed visitor or governess from the north. The stock Negro characters include the faithful man, servant, the devoted and domineering black mammy, the beautiful mulatto, and the storyteller. In her romances, Mrs. Hentz utilizes many of these stereotypes. In its cast of characters, The Planter's Northern Bride actually has more in common with Uncle Tom's Cabin than with many other plantation romances, even those of its own author. Perhaps the parallels result from Mrs. Hentz's deliberate attempt to counter Mrs. Stowe's argument with similar characters and situations. In addition to certain stereotype characters, readers of the plantation romances expected sensational action and extravagant sentiments. The Planter's Northern Bride, however, is less typical in this respect. Yet, The Planter's Northern Bride satisfied the popular taste by means of its Cinderella beginning, its dramatic contrast between the lives of the very rich and very poor, and its glorification. Her narrative moves forward frequently by dialogue, lacking in Mrs. Stowe's irony and humor. The reasoning in defense of slavery is also fairly typical. Mrs. Hentz showed sympathy for a running away slave. She also refused to approve of the original enslavement of the race, even though she could allow her planter to view it as the will of God. Her method of defending slavery was the stock one of dramatizing the difference in the condition of laborers in the North and the South, and demonstrating the manner in which skeptical or hostile Northerners of plantation were converted when they became eyewitnesses of plantation paternalism. Just as Mrs. Stowe had made certain Southerners the severest critiques of slavery, so Mrs. Hentz introduces thoughtful system of any laboring class. Her readers will doubtless be curious about these commitments to the cause for which she debated with Mrs. Stowe. In The Planter's Northern Bride, more than in any of other novels, Mrs. Hentz sketched the landscape and the folk custom of the Lower South. In this respect, both she and Mrs. Stowe took more pains than most of their contemporaries. But of the two authors, Mrs. Hentz was more generous with details. She was too ambitious when, by defending slavery, she hoped she might help prevent the war with, according to Abraham Lincoln, Mrs. Stowe caused. Caroline's novel pales beside the vitality of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Yet it remains an interesting variation of a durable genre of one of the more conscientious and successful attempts to picture plantation life in the last decade of slavery. Thanks for watching.